Picture this: 500 guests, $1 million dress, and cameras flashing as I walked down the aisle. But halfway there, I stopped, turned around, and walked right back out of my own wedding. Everyone thought I lost my mind. Truth is, I finally found it. If you've ever felt like you were settling for less than you deserve, this story is for you. Hit that like button if you believe in choosing yourself, and subscribe because we're about to dive deep into what it really means to know your worth. Let me tell you who I am before I tell you what I did. My name is Camille, and at 34, I'm worth $2.8 billion. Now, I don't say that to brag. I say it because understanding my success is crucial to understanding why walking away from that altar was the hardest and best decision I ever made. I built my first tech company when I was 22 years old, fresh out of college, with nothing but a laptop, a dream, and more determination than money in my bank account. While my friends were figuring out their career paths, I was coding 18-hour days in my studio apartment, living off ramen noodles and pure ambition. My company started as a simple app to help small businesses manage their finances, but it grew into something bigger than I ever imagined. The thing about building an empire from scratch is that it becomes your first love, your first priority, your first everything. I poured my heart, soul, and every waking moment into growing my business. Relationships, they came and went. Love? Well, love always seemed to come second to the next big deal, the next breakthrough, the next milestone. I told myself I'd have time for all that later, when I reached whatever arbitrary number I'd set as my definition of success. By 30, I had offices in 12 countries. By 32, we went public. By 34, I was on every major business magazine cover you can think of. I had the penthouse, the cars, the respect of industry leaders who once wouldn't return my calls. I had everything I thought I wanted. But here's what they don't tell you about success when you're a black woman climbing to the top. Every room you enter, you're not just representing yourself. You're carrying the hopes and dreams of everyone who looks like you. Everyone who's been told they can't. Everyone who's been overlooked or underestimated. That pressure shaped me. It made me fierce, unstoppable, and admittedly, a little guarded when it came to matters of the heart. I learned early that my success intimidated some people, attracted the wrong people, and confused a lot of people who couldn't understand how a girl from Detroit could build something this big. So, yeah, love took a back seat. I figured the right person would come along eventually, someone who could handle all of me. 2 years ago, I met David at a charity gala in Manhattan. I was being honored for my foundation's work in providing tech education to underserved communities, and he was there representing his family's law firm. David Wellington III, if you want to get technical about it. Old money, old family, old traditions, everything I wasn't. But Lord, was he charming. Tall, handsome in that classic way, with a smile that could light up a room and a confidence that matched mine. He approached me after my speech, and I'll admit, I was flattered. Here was this successful, accomplished man who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, not just impressed by my bank account or intimidated by my achievements. Our first conversation lasted 3 hours. We talked about everything from business to books to our shared love of jazz music. He was articulate, funny, and seemed genuinely fascinated by my journey. When he asked me to dinner the next week, I said yes without hesitation. It had been so long since someone had captured my attention like that. The courtship was like something out of a romance novel. David knew all the right restaurants, sent the most beautiful flowers, and planned dates that showed he'd actually listened to what I liked. He took me to private jazz clubs, art galleries, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard. For the first time in years, I found myself looking forward to something other than a board meeting or product launch. 8 months in, he proposed. Picture this: sunset dinner on a yacht he'd chartered, a 12-carat diamond ring that caught the light like liquid fire, and a speech about how he wanted to spend his life loving and protecting me. I said yes before he even finished asking. Everything about it felt perfect, like the missing piece of my life had finally clicked into place. David seemed to understand my world in a way that others hadn't. He came from success, understood the pressures, the responsibilities, the way business could consume your life if you let it. His family's law firm had been around for 4 generations, so he knew what it meant to carry on a legacy. I thought I'd finally found someone who could stand beside me as an equal, someone who celebrated my achievements instead of feeling threatened by them. I thought I'd found my partner in every sense of the word. The engagement period was a whirlwind of planning, parties, and publicity. The media ate it up. Successful black tech entrepreneur marrying into old money legal dynasty. We were featured in magazines, invited to exclusive events, treated like some sort of power couple fairy tale. David seemed to love the attention as much as I did. He'd hold my hand at events, beam with pride when people congratulated him on landing such a successful woman, and talk about our future with such certainty that I never questioned whether we were on the same page about what that future would look like. Looking back now, I realize I fell in love with the idea of David as much as I fell in love with the man himself. He represented everything I thought I needed: stability, partnership, a love that could match my ambition. He was my proof that I could have it all, that success and love weren't mutually exclusive, that I didn't have to choose between being a businesswoman and being a wife. But sometimes, what looks perfect on paper doesn't translate to real life. Sometimes the fairy tale is just that, a story. You know how they say love is blind? Well, success can make you deaf too. Because looking back, David was telling me exactly who he was and what he expected. I just wasn't listening, or maybe I didn't want to hear it. It started small, the way these things always do. Little comments that felt like suggestions but were actually instructions. You know, sweetheart, you might want to tone down the business talk at dinner parties. Some people find it a bit overwhelming. Or maybe you could delegate more to your team. You work too hard, and it's not very feminine. At first, I thought he was being protective, caring about my well-being. I even found it endearing that he wanted to take care of me. Then came the bigger conversations. About 6 months into our engagement, David started talking about how things would change after the wedding. How he thought it would be good for me to step back from the day-to-day operations of my company. "You've already proven yourself," he'd say, stroking my hair like I was a child who needed reassurance. "You don't need to keep grinding like you're still trying to make it. Let the executives handle things while you focus on being my wife." Being his wife. Not being a wife and a CEO. Not being a partner in our marriage while maintaining my identity. Being his wife, like that was a full-time job that couldn't coexist with anything else I'd built. When I pushed back, he'd get this patient smile, like he was dealing with a stubborn child. "Camille, baby, I make enough money to support us both. You don't need the stress anymore. Wouldn't it be nice to just relax for once?" His family was another story entirely. David's mother, Patricia, was old-school Charleston society. Every conversation with her felt like a test I was failing. She'd make comments about my colorful background, always with that fake smile that didn't reach her eyes. At family dinners, she'd steer conversations away from my business toward topics she deemed more appropriate: charity work, home decorating, recipes. When I'd try to contribute to discussions about law or politics, she'd get this tight expression and change the subject. David's father was more subtle, but equally problematic. He'd ask about my company in this condescending way, like he was humoring a child playing dress-up. "How nice that you've done so well for yourself, dear. Of course, things will be different once you're family." The implication was clear. My success was cute but temporary, a phase I'd grow out of once I settled into my proper role as a Wellington wife. The worst part was how David handled it all. When I'd bring up my discomfort with his family's attitude, he'd dismiss my concerns. They just need time to get used to you, he'd say. You're different from what they're used to, but they'll come around. Different. Like my blackness, my success, my independence were quirks they'd eventually tolerate, rather than qualities they should respect. My friends started expressing concerns too. Jessica, my business partner and closest friend, pulled me aside after a dinner party where David had spent the evening introducing me as my beautiful fiancé instead of by my name or achievements. Camille, I love you, but this man is trying to shrink you, she said, and you're letting him. My mentor, Dr. Patricia Robinson, the woman who'd guided me through every major business decision, was even more direct. Child, that man sees you as a trophy, not a partner. Be careful you don't trade your crown for his ring. But I was in love, or thought I was. I convinced myself that everyone else just didn't understand our relationship, that they were jealous or protective or unable to see what I saw in David. I made excuses for every red flag. His family would adjust. His comments came from a place of love. His vision for our future was just different from mine, but we could compromise. I was so invested in the idea of our perfect love story that I ignored the growing voice in my head telling me something wasn't right. The truth is, I'd spent so many years building my empire that I'd forgotten what it felt like to be valued for who I was, rather than what I could provide. David's attention felt like validation, his proposal felt like acceptance, and his vision of our future felt like love. I confused his desire to possess me with his desire to protect me. I mistook his need to control my success for his commitment to our partnership. And I ignored every warning sign, because admitting they were right would mean admitting I'd made a mistake, and I wasn't used to being wrong about anything that mattered. The morning of my wedding, I woke up in a suite at the Four Seasons that cost more than most people make in a year. My dress hung in the corner like a ghost, this $50,000 masterpiece of silk and diamonds that was supposed to make me feel like a princess. Instead, I felt like I was preparing for my own funeral. I should have been excited. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. But as I sat there getting my hair and makeup done by a team of professionals, something felt wrong in my chest. My stomach was twisted in knots, and it wasn't wedding day nerves. It was something deeper, something that had been growing for months, but I'd kept pushing down. The makeup artist kept telling me how beautiful I looked, how David was the luckiest man alive. The hairstylist gushed about the romance of it all, but all I could think about was the conversation I'd overheard the night before at the rehearsal dinner. I'd been coming back from the bathroom when I heard David talking to his mother in the hallway. "Don't worry, Mom." His voice carried that confident tone I'd fallen in love with. "She'll calm down after we're married. Women like her just need structure. Once she's settled into being a wife, all this business nonsense will take a back seat where it belongs." Women like her. Business nonsense. Those words kept echoing in my head as they pinned my veil, as they handed me my bouquet, as everyone told me how perfect everything was going to be. I kept thinking about how he'd said, "Women like her," like I was some wild animal that needed taming, like my life's work was just a hobby I'd outgrow once I had a husband to focus on. The music started, and 500 people stood up to watch me walk toward my future. The cathedral was everything I'd dreamed of. Flowers everywhere, candles flickering, light streaming through stained glass windows like something out of a movie. David stood at the altar in his perfect tuxedo, looking like every woman's fantasy of Prince Charming. But as I started down that endless aisle, something shifted. Maybe it was the way he was looking at me, not with love but with possession, like he'd already won some prize and was just waiting to claim it. Maybe it was seeing his mother's satisfied smile, like she was watching her plan come together perfectly. Or maybe it was the weight of that conversation from the night before finally hitting me full force. With each step, I felt smaller, not physically, but spiritually, like I was walking away from everything I'd built, everything I was, everything I'd fought to become. The woman who'd built a billion-dollar empire from nothing was about to disappear, replaced by Mrs. David Wellington III. The woman who'd never backed down from a challenge was about to spend her life being someone's accessory. Halfway down the aisle, I stopped. Just stopped walking. The music kept playing, the guests kept staring, but I couldn't take another step. I looked at David, really looked at him, and saw my future laid out clearly. Board meetings where my opinions wouldn't matter because David handles the business decisions now. Charity events where I'd be introduced as his wife, not as the woman who'd donated millions to education. A life spent being small so he could feel big. That's when I realized I wasn't walking toward love. I was walking toward my own disappearance. Standing there in front of 500 people, wearing a dress that cost more than some houses, I made a choice that would change everything. I turned around, not slowly, not dramatically, but with the same decisiveness I used in boardrooms when I knew a deal was wrong. The gasps were immediate. Someone dropped their phone. A child asked loudly, "Why is the bride going backward?" But I kept walking, my head held high, my bouquet still in my hand, my train trailing behind me like I was a queen leaving her own coronation. David called out behind me, his voice cracking with confusion and embarrassment. Camille, what are you doing? Come back." But I didn't turn around. I couldn't, because if I looked at his face, if I saw the hurt and confusion there, I might have weakened. I might have convinced myself to go through with it, to sacrifice myself on the altar of everyone else's expectations. My parents were in the front row, their faces a mixture of shock and panic. My mother reached out as I passed, but I gently squeezed her hand and kept moving. I loved them, but this wasn't about them. This wasn't about anyone but me, and the choice between living authentically or living a lie. By the time I reached the back of the cathedral, David had caught up with me. He grabbed my arm, not gently, and spun me around. "What the hell are you doing?" he hissed, his perfect composure cracking. "Do you have any idea how this looks? How embarrassing this is?" And there it was. His first concern wasn't my well-being or happiness. It was how this looked, how embarrassed he was, how this reflected on him. "I can't do this, David," I said, my voice steady despite my racing heart. "I can't marry someone who sees my success as something to manage instead of something to celebrate." He tried to convince me, tried to make promises about how things would be different, how we could work it out. But I'd already made my decision. I handed him my bouquet, lifted my dress, and walked out of that cathedral into the brightest sunshine I'd ever seen. The media explosion was immediate and brutal. By the time I got back to my apartment, the hashtag wedding walkout was trending worldwide. Photos of me leaving the cathedral were on every gossip site, every news outlet, every social media platform. The headlines ranged from sympathetic to savage, billionaire bride's bold exit to cold feet or cold heart. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Reporters wanted statements, friends wanted explanations, business partners wanted to know if this would affect our deals. My publicist was having a nervous breakdown. My lawyer was fielding calls about the venue deposit, and my assistant had to change my numbers 3 times in one day. But the hardest part was my family. My parents were devastated, not just by my decision, but by the public humiliation. My mother cried for days, convinced I'd thrown away my chance at happiness. My father was angry, asking how I could embarrass them like that in front of everyone they knew. "We raised you better than this," he said, and those words cut deeper than any headline. Some friends stood by me, but others didn't. I lost relationships I thought were solid, people who decided I was selfish or crazy or having some kind of breakdown. David's friends painted me as unstable. His family spread rumors about my mental health, and suddenly I was the villain in my own love story. David himself tried everything to win me back. Flowers, letters, showing up at my office building. He promised therapy, compromise, change. But I knew the truth. You can't change someone's fundamental view of who you are and what you're worth. He saw me as something to be managed, not someone to be loved fully and completely. The weeks after the wedding were some of the darkest of my life. The public humiliation was one thing, but the private doubts were worse. Late at night, alone in my penthouse, I'd wonder if everyone was right. Maybe I was self-sabotaging. Maybe I was too demanding, too independent, too much for any man to handle. Maybe I'd thrown away my last chance at real love. The business world watched closely to see if my personal drama would affect my professional judgment. Some investors pulled out of deals, questioning my stability. Board meetings became uncomfortable affairs where everyone pretended not to notice the elephant in the room. My stock price fluctuated with every new headline about my love life. David's attempts to reconcile became increasingly desperate and invasive. He'd show up at restaurants where I was dining, at conferences where I was speaking, even at my gym. His apologies came with conditions. He'd love me exactly as I was, but maybe I could just consider scaling back a little, just for the sake of our relationship. Even his groveling came with the expectation that I should change. His family launched a quiet but vicious campaign against my reputation. Suddenly, stories appeared in society pages about my difficult personality, my unrealistic expectations, my inability to compromise. They painted me as a woman so consumed with power that I couldn't submit to love. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were proving exactly why I'd been right to walk away. But the hardest part was the loneliness. For the first time in years, I had space in my life for a relationship, but I was completely alone. I'd go to bed in my enormous apartment and wonder if I'd chosen pride over love, if my standards were too high, if I'd end up as one of those successful but lonely women people whisper about. 6 months after the wedding, I started therapy. Not because I thought I was wrong, but because I needed to understand why I'd almost made such a massive mistake. Why had I ignored so many red flags? Why had I been willing to shrink myself for someone else's comfort? What was I really looking for in love? Dr. Sarah Chen helped me unpack patterns I'd been carrying since childhood. The pressure to be perfect, to prove myself worthy, to make others comfortable with my success. I realized I'd been so focused on being successful that I'd never learned to be genuinely confident in who I was beyond my achievements. We talked about how growing up as a black girl, I'd learned early that taking up space was dangerous, that being too smart, too ambitious, too much of anything could make people uncomfortable. So I'd learned to code switch, to make myself palatable, to dim my light so others wouldn't feel overshadowed. I'd carried that programming into my relationship with David, trying to be the kind of successful that didn't threaten his masculinity. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chen asked me a simple question. If you met someone exactly like you, would you want them to change? The answer was immediate and clear. Absolutely not. I'd want them to shine brighter, achieve more, take up all the space they deserved. So why was I willing to accept less for myself? I started to understand the difference between being alone and being lonely. I'd been lonely in my relationship with David, constantly editing myself to fit his vision of who I should be, but alone in my authenticity. That felt like freedom. I began to see my single status not as a failure, but as a choice, not as settling for less, but as refusing to settle at all. During this time, my relationship with my parents slowly healed. They began to understand that my decision wasn't about rejecting love, but about refusing to accept a counterfeit version of it. My mother, who'd spent her whole marriage deferring to my father's decisions, began to see my choice as brave rather than selfish. A year after the wedding, I was invited to speak at the Women's Leadership Summit in Los Angeles. The topic was redefining success, but what I really wanted to talk about was redefining love. I'd never spoken publicly about the wedding, but something told me it was time. Standing on that stage in front of 2,000 women, I told my truth. Not about David specifically, but about the choice between authenticity and acceptance, between love and the performance of love, between partnership and possession. I talked about how success as a Black woman often feels like walking a tightrope, being enough but not too much, strong but not threatening, accomplished but still approachable. The response was overwhelming. Women came up to me afterward with tears in their eyes, sharing their own stories of relationships where they'd made themselves smaller, careers they'd sacrificed, dreams they'd deferred for love that wasn't really love at all. I realized my story wasn't just about me, it was about every woman who'd ever been asked to choose between her greatness and her relationships. That speech launched something I never expected, a mentorship program for young women in business. Not just about building companies, but about building lives where success and love could coexist without compromise. I started hosting workshops, writing articles, speaking at universities about the importance of knowing your worth and refusing to negotiate it away. My company hit new heights during this period. Without the distraction of trying to manage someone else's ego alongside my business responsibilities, I was able to focus completely on growth and innovation. We launched 3 new products, expanded into 5 new markets, and increased our valuation by 40%. Turns out, when you're not spending energy making yourself smaller, you have a lot more room to grow. I also began to understand what healthy love looked like by observing it in others. My business partner, Jessica, had been with her wife for 8 years, and watching them together showed me what partnership really meant. They celebrated each other's wins, supported each other through challenges, and somehow managed to make each other better without asking either person to be less than they were. Here I am, 2 years later, at 36 years old, single, thriving, and completely at peace with both of those facts. My company is now worth $4.2 billion. I've been featured on the cover of Forbes 3 times, named one of Time's most influential people, and invited to speak at economic summits around the world. But more importantly, I wake up every morning as my full, authentic self. I'm not closed off to love. If anything, I'm more open to it than I've ever been because now I know what real love looks like. It looks like celebration, not toleration. It looks like partnership, not possession. It looks like someone who sees your light and wants to help it shine brighter, not dim it down to make themselves feel more comfortable. The relationships in my life now are genuine in a way they never were before. My friendships are deeper because they're built on authenticity rather than performance. My family relationships are stronger because they're based on respect rather than obligation. And my relationship with myself, that's the strongest it's ever been. I date occasionally, but on completely different terms. I'm upfront about who I am, what I've built, and what I refuse to compromise. Some men are intimidated and disappear quickly, which saves us both time. Others are intrigued, but ultimately can't handle the reality of being with someone whose success might overshadow their own. And that's okay. I'd rather be alone with my integrity than coupled with someone who requires me to diminish myself for their comfort. People ask me if I regret walking away from David, if I think I'll ever find someone who can handle all of me. My answer is simple. I already found her. She was there all along, just waiting for me to stop trying to trade her away for someone else's version of love. If you're watching this and you're in a relationship where you feel like you have to hide parts of yourself, where your success makes your partner uncomfortable, where you're constantly being asked to be less, so they can feel like more, please hear me. You deserve better. You deserve someone who celebrates your wins like they're their own, who brags about your accomplishments to their friends, who sees your strength as beautiful rather than threatening. And if you're single and feeling like something's wrong with you because you can't find someone who appreciates all of you, let me tell you something. There's nothing wrong with having standards. There's nothing wrong with refusing to settle. There's nothing wrong with being alone until you find someone worthy of your company. Better alone than with someone who dims your light. Better single than with someone who sees your success as a problem to be managed. Better by yourself than with someone who loves an edited version of who you are. Your worth isn't determined by your relationship status. Your value isn't measured by someone else's ability to appreciate you. Your success isn't something you should have to apologize for or minimize for anyone else's comfort. That day, I walked out of my own wedding. People thought I lost my mind, but I didn't lose anything. I found everything: my voice, my worth, my uncompromising commitment to living authentically. And if that means I'm alone, then I'm alone with the most important person in my life, myself. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment telling me about a time you chose yourself over settling. Subscribe for more real stories about success, love, and knowing your worth. And remember, you deserve someone who celebrates your shine, not someone who asks you to dim it. Until then, keep shining anyway. The right person will need sunglasses, not curtains.